Hi, and welcome to the Take the Stage podcast. I'm your host, Alexis Alvarez, and I'm on a mission to help make diversity more of a reality for lower middle market and middle market investment firms. Take the Stage celebrates and amplifies diverse voices and serves as a platform for conversations that encompass a wide range of perspectives. You're going to hear candid conversations that touch on career paths, the not so linear kind, valuable insights, practical advice, and honest stories on navigating and succeeding on the buy side. Today on Take the Stage, we shine the spotlight on Noramay Cadena, co-founder and managing partner at Supply Chain Capital, an early-stage venture firm investing at the intersection of food, culture, and climate. A mechanical engineer by training and a former aerospace leader at Boeing, Noramay took the unconventional route into venture capital, founding her first fund without prior VC experience, network, or pedigree. In this episode, we're going to cover how one moment of representation changed the trajectory of Noramay's life, what she learned from breaking into venture the hardest way possible, why Supply Chain Capital is focused on the food system as a path to equity and innovation, the trade-off firms make when they favor pedigree over grit, why engineers are turning to food and agtech to drive visible, human-centered impact, and more. So today on Take the Stage, we have Noramay Cadena from Supply Chain Capital. So before we dive into your venture journey, Noramay, I'd like to rewind a little bit. So you and I, on our exploratory call, realized that we are both Valley girls. And when I say Valley girls, those of us from the Valley know that maybe we have to specify the San Fernando Valley, not the not the San Gabriel Valley. That's a very Southern California thing.
Not Silicon Valley.
Not Silicon Valley. Exactly. We're the proper, authentic Valley girls. So this question has to do with kind of your roots and growing up in the San Fernando Valley. So how did that shape the lens through which you see the world and opportunities today?
Ooh, it's a loaded question, Alexis, but yes, hashtag 818.
Yes. Everyone from the Valley is going to be like shaking their heads. Yeah. They're the only ones who are going to know what we're talking about.
Yeah, pre zip code, bifurcation and all of that. I was born in Mexico and raised in the San Fernando Valley, and certainly that experience did shape how I see the world and the fire in my belly and the desire to give back. And I think that the marquee experience I had in high school was having the opportunity to have someone who had left the Valley come back and share their story in a way that made them so relatable and also inspiring. And so the story is I'm in high school. I'm strong in math and science. I'm in AP physics and AP calculus, and yet I don't know what I want to do with my life, right? I don't have a sense for who I can be or what I can study or the impact I can have. And so I'm pulled out of class one day along with a few other students, and a gentleman comes in and says, I grew up around the corner of the high school. My dad is a janitor. My mom is illiterate, and I'm studying mechanical engineering at MIT. And, the teachers sort of gasped, and students had no idea that was a big deal. But his story was pretty remarkable in that it made me think for the first time, if he can do it, I can do it. And he sounds amazing, and I want to be just like that. And so that was the first inflection point, and I really call it the tap-on-the-shoulder moment. And I'll tell you that when things get hard, when the climate around diversity heightens as it is right now, I always think about that tap on the shoulder moment, and I remind myself that I was at risk of not being found, right? So all that I've done and all that I've contributed could have been lost to a lack of opportunity, a lack of access, and a lack of luck as well. And so that was my big first inflection point. And I've lived my life now, whether I'm in the corporate, whether I've been in the corporate sector, in the nonprofit space, or now especially in the venture space, reminding myself that many other people need to be tapped along the way.
Mm-hmm. What do you think was driving you then? So you meet this person, you see that there is someone like you. So that concept of representation, right? That we hear a lot about, and it can be very difficult to explain, right? And to kind of articulate, right? But what do you think at that point, like seeing at that precise moment in your life, what did that do for you? How did it drive you, or what was driving you at that point?
So before that, I think I was on a I don't know. I was naturally smart. My family grew up disadvantaged, right, to say the least. My parents had either kitchen or factory jobs my entire childhood. I didn't have an example of what going to college looked like. No one in our extended family had been. So I was driven by my life looking differently. And so, I mean, I remember telling my classmates, I have no idea what I'm doing, but I'm not doing this, right? I'm not repeating what I lived through for myself. And, it's important to note that I was a teen mom. And so at the age of 17, I had my daughter, and that heightened that sense of needing to change my life and having a different outcome. And so all I knew was I'm going to work hard because I don't want the life I've lived. And so that was the driver. When this mentor came along, the new drive was, we can do things that are hard and things that are different and things we may not have imagined for ourselves. And now I see an example of someone living that life who's just like me. And if he can do it, well, then, I'm pretty smart. I can do it too. So you're right. The relatable representation, I mean, to the level of, I lived 2 streets down from this high school. I may have sat in one of these chairs in this classroom. My parents are just like yours. So the family history was a big deal too.
Mm-hmm. So what happens at that point? What point do you decide that you, as a 17-year-old, a young mom, the concept of going to college halfway across the country, like tell me how that how that conversation went.
Yeah, my parents were oddly, mostly supportive. There are a few funny narratives, right? My dad, I remember asking me, why are they sending you all the way over there? Weren't you good enough to go to the local, Cal State University? And I thought that was so cute, right? In his mind, if you're a good student, then your reward is you get to stay close to home,
Yeah.
which is super cute. And I'd overhear my mom on the phone with family members saying, she went all the way to the other side of California. She went to Michigan. And I just thought, oh my gosh, Mom, that's wrong on many levels, but it's really cute. So I'm just going to let it be. And it's also important to note that at this time, I mean, I've been back home to Mexico, but I hadn't traveled anywhere else. I knew I'd been to no other state. And all of a sudden, I'm telling my family that I'm taking my daughter and I'm moving to Massachusetts, right? And I didn't know, I mean, the truth is I didn't know what was waiting for me. I didn't know how hard it would be. All I knew was that I needed to leave my life behind. And the fear of the unknown was not as scary as remembering, what my life had been like. And so I was willing to do it. I think that was my first moment of bravery. And I'm a firm believer in that our body has muscle memory for doing hard things. And the next time I had to make a big decision in my life, I just thought, I've done harder things. And, we've been there and we've survived. So let's do it. So I relocated. I brought my daughter with me. I was advised to follow a 5-year plan. I was advised to pick a major that was less hard than engineering, and I didn't. So I studied mechanical engineering. I graduated in 4 years. I had 3 internships during my undergrad career. I spent a summer in Venice, Italy, on an exchange program. So I took my undergrad thesis work to Nicaragua and did a research on the field. I mean, I really, really lived my undergrad experience in a way that was fulfilling and amazing and opened doors to how I would continue to live my career.
And I find this, like incredibly inspiring because I have 3 kids and I have a husband and a lot of help and I'm not, I feel like everything you're saying, you've made it sound very, I mean, of course there's, you're mentioning that it's difficult, but I mean, on a, like how did you manage that? A demanding school load, obviously these extracurriculars, with study abroad. How do you do that as a young mom? You don't, a first generation college student. Tell me like that grit, that part that is the piece that I feel is so compelling to at least
Yeah.
this chapter of your life.
Oh yeah, this chapter is definitely full of grit. I think the real answer is I have no idea because I I now also have a younger child and a husband, and I look back and think, you know, how in the haystack, to borrow a phrase from one of my son's favorite podcasts, how in the haystack did that happen, right? I don't know. Um, I know that I was excited to to excited about the access to things that I never imagined, right? Um, and I was still very much in tune with the reality of the San Fernando Valley and the reality of my family. I was working on campus so that I could send money home to my parents, and so like the reality of where I came from was still very much front and center, but so was my daughter. And so for me, that my fire in the belly was like, she's here, she's real. And, I kept thinking back to the conversation I had with my dad when I told him I was pregnant. And his second question was, I thought you wanted to go to school. And I said, I do. And he said, okay, well, we'll find a way to make it work, right? But that those words, I thought you wanted to go to school, were top of mind for me. And so I just reminded myself, this is what I wanted, and this is the ticket, right? I think just like so many immigrant parents make a long perilous journey, right? It's their ticket to something different. They don't know what's waiting for them, but they know that it's got to be better than where they're coming from. And so I think that was the driving force for me. And I'll tell you also that I had a teacher in high school who just gave me this different framework for how to think about challenges. I wrote him a letter, and I said, I was my parents saw me as a ticket to something different, and I've completely ruined it. I've ruined the prospects for my family. And he drew this line graph for me, and it went from 0 to 100, and he said, this is your likely lifespan, and you're here at 16 at the time. And he said, your life has this much left, 85-ish% left. And you can have peaks, you can have valleys, but look at how much is left for you. You've only done this much. And so when I was at MIT, I would take, I'd say, oh my God, I'm never getting through 4 years. Well, I can't think about 4 years. It seems insurmountable. So I'm going to think about my freshman year, and I'm going to think about the fall semester, and I'm going to think about getting through September. And then I'm going to think about getting through this week. And if I can get through this week, I'll be okay. And then at the end of the week, it was a, real hard week. And I'd say, if I can get through this next week, I'll be okay. So the practice of reminding myself that the journey is long and we're only here, and we're going to take this really big challenge and break it down to small pieces and only focus on the small piece for the moment. That's what got me through.
Mm.
And I still do that, right?
Yeah.
I've got to raise $50 million. That sounds crazy. Let's focus on the first 10. How do we get the first 10? And then I'm not even going to worry about the next 40. Once we have the 10, how do we get the next 10? And I'm going to be hyper focused on this 10. So I still do that.
That's such a good way to, and I feel like my mom always says the same thing. She's like, oh, it's just day by day. Just take it day by day, don't think about, she's very much so like live today, worry about tomorrow, but in a smart way, and is always very much so like, do what you can today and just think about whatever you can do today. And then tomorrow is a new day. The sun will come up tomorrow. And then it's the same thing. Okay. Try to do whatever it is that you need to do today. And, by the time, you look back after 7 days, you've advanced, right? You've inched your way closer, and then you do the same thing all over again. And it's very simple advice, right? It's very simple and very common sense. But the older I get, the more I realize we just simply don't have common sense. We have very little common sense, most people.
Yeah.
Okay. So fast forward, you get through MIT in 4 years. And you mentioned that you joined Boeing, you had a 12-year career, in the aerospace. Of course you didn't, you decided to do engineering and you decide to go build aircrafts. Yes. I see a pattern here. Like, so tell us a little bit about kind of maybe that time. And then I know that you mentioned you decided to walk away. So kind of bring us to that point.
Yes. Okay. So I've finished my degree. I've done two or three summers at Boeing. And so I joined the company full time. I'm working on commercial satellites, which, go up in space and provide things like satellite radio, direct TV, communications, internet while you're on a flight. And, quickly realized that it wasn't as hard as I imagined it to be, right? I remember when I started my full-time career, I parked in the parking lot and I walked across the street and I'm headed toward the building and there's this big company sign. And I thought, wow, my dad started working at the age of 5. He's one of 13 children. He started by shining shoes and selling newspaper in the park. My mom only went to school through 2nd grade and then was pulled out to help the family out in the fields. And I thought, our family's not doing too bad, right? If we can make this leap, what can we do next? And so the idea of big goals and big leaps is also another theme, I think. But I enjoyed it. I had a very technical career, quickly led teams of people, had P&L responsibility over, full systems, had a great time. However, I realized that I was really following in the footsteps of my mentor, right? From that first moment when I was inspired. He had studied mechanical engineering, so did I. He worked in the aerospace industry, so did I. And I thought, I don't know that this is my goal. And so I needed to get off that career path. And so I decided to take a job within a different business unit. And totally threw a kink in the system, I relocated to Washington State, the Puget Sound, and started working within Boeing's commercial airplane division. And this was the beginning of me carving my own path. It's another strong lesson and inflection point where, over the first, I think it was 3 years. So over the first 3 years of full-time work, I had validated that, yes, I could do this. Yes, I'm smart enough. And then I wanted to set my own path. I don't want to follow anyone. I didn't want to follow anyone anymore. And so being in a different environment allowed me to then carve my own, right? Carve my own next steps, which was incredibly important and a good lesson to learn at that time. So I'd continue another several years, go back to grad school. I got an MBA and a master's in engineering, and then went back into the corporate sector. And what I found was that I was, I wanted to move faster. I was working for a large corporate company, and innovation comes slowly. And so I wanted to move faster. I thought I could grow more quickly in a company that was small and nimble, where I could wear many hats. And so after 12 years, 10 years ago now, a little over 10 years ago now, I decided to leave Boeing. And it was an incredibly scary idea. I was leaving a corporate job, great paycheck, great benefits, for entrepreneurship. I was starting my own venture capital firm because it was the perfect intersection between moving innovation to market, so creating new products, this community building, which had been a big part of how I ran my career. I had co-founded Latinas in STEM, which is an organization all about getting more women into technical careers. And so that combination of moving innovation to market, creating community, and then again tapping people on the shoulder and getting to decide whose ideas have a shot at being successful, made venture capital very appealing to me. And so in 2015, I quit my job and started a firm.
And okay, so I like this. At what point were you exposed to VC?
Never. When I went to business school, 2009 to 2011, I was 100% sure that I was going to be in the corporate sector forever. In fact, I thought I would be at Boeing for the rest of my life, right? I envisioned myself as the VP and general manager of an airplane program. I mean, I had the role, I had the trajectory, I knew what I needed to do to get there. I become, I had a spreadsheet. I become pretty obsessive about goals like that. when I see the final point, and I work backwards, and I say, here's what I need to get there, and this is what it takes. So when I was in business school, I didn't take any entrepreneurship classes. I wasn't, part of those clubs. And I also had my daughter with me. She was 11 through 13, I think. And so I was not exposed to venture. It wasn't until I started looking for a job, and the venture ecosystem in Los Angeles in 2015 was still pretty nascent, right? It wasn't the big hub that it is now, but there was certainly a vision for what LA could be in terms of an entrepreneurship city, and venture-backed companies were they were making some noise. We had Ring in LA, and there were a few others that were pretty new and popular. So that I had very early exposure to venture capital. I mean, I learned very fast through the hardest way possible, trying to start a firm without a network in the space. But that's how that's where I learned everything about venture.
You just decided to just like from one day to the next, you're like, great, I'm gonna build it myself.
Totally. Jumping into the deep end. Don't know anyone, don't have any money. Yes, it's gonna happen.
You're literally gonna build the plane and learn how to fly it too, to put it into your.
No. As an Boeing employee, that analogy is just awful. Awful.
I said it on purpose, just keeping with the aerospace.
Yeah, totally. But yes, yeah.
All right. So you decide to make this, what could be perceived as this absurd decision at the time,
Totally.
right? Going from leaving like the nice cushy corporate world into an extremely risky, move in which you don't have,
Yeah.
the typical story to get you
Mhm.
there. So talk to me a little bit about what that process was, because you mentioned to me on our last, on our exploratory call, that this was, the way you did it was the hardest
Yeah.
way to break into this space, and if you could do it again, you would do it differently. So
Yeah.
so talk to me about that, how you did it, what happened along the way, and maybe what you would do differently.
Yes, 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 absolutely. So I had one partner, quit my job, started this venture. I was the door was left open for me to return to my corporate job, right? I think I had a year or so to come back because, I'd probably fail. And and so this was the hardest way to do this. We had a small Rolodex of, folks in professional positions who might care about the innovation around the Internet of Things, which was a big hot topic in 2015. But we set out to raise 10 million and to create this hub in Southern California for hardware and hard tech, right? So there was a big pivot to venture capital, but the consistency through, or the thread from Boeing to this, was that we were focusing on hard tech, manufacturing, supply chain, so areas that I knew well. Uh, but we were starting from scratch. So that meant we had to create a brand. We had to attract founders, have founders get to know us. We had to raise capital. We had to build partnerships. And so all of that happened in what felt like a very long 5 years. We raised capital. We invested in 22 companies. We built an accelerator program and ran 5 cohorts of it. We built out a 35,000 square foot co-working and innovation space that included a machine shop and an art gallery, where about 100 San Fernando Valley entrepreneurs and founders worked out of, and had an event space to call home. And so I had to learn a lot, and learn it quickly. If I could do this all over again, or if I were advising someone who was trying to break into venture from the corporate sector, I'd say go work for a large firm where you don't have to fight for dollars. Learn what it really takes to build the firm, right? From what does it take post investment? What does it take to win the deal? How do you meet startups? Build your network of co-investors, right? Do this under the safety of an established firm or brand. And then it's very interesting that in venture, the idea of a spin-off is very appealing. So someone who's coming from a big firm and now starting their own thing because, they've done it the right way, and they may now have a unique lens, but they've learned the building blocks or the basics from an established player. And so I think had I done it that way, the path to where I am now, which is exactly where I want to be, would have been faster, more fruitful, and certainly less stressful.
Did it not, was that not an option for you, or why did you choose to fund, to found your own fund as opposed to doing exactly what you just said?
Yeah, that's a great question. I didn't set out to build a firm when I knew that I wanted to leave, right? I made the decision that I needed to leave. What I was looking for was a venture-backed company where I could move quickly and do a lot of things. Um, and there weren't very many of those available. So in my search for a venture-backed company, I met a guy who had been investing as an angel, who had, about a dozen investments he wanted to roll up. And he pitched this idea, right? I have this idea, I roll up my investments, we create this ecosystem, and we find the underdog founders, and we put LA on the map. And so the language very much resonated with me. I thought, I want to fund underdog entrepreneurs. I want to create community, and I want to do it in LA. And I do think this is a great time for hardware. And so because I didn't initially set out to join a venture firm, right? It sort of found me, and this unique perspective on how to do it was appealing. And so I really said yes to that specific outlook and approach. But yes, if I were doing it again, I would have said, okay, well, this is one option, right? What are other options? what are the pros and cons? And then I would have, certainly decided to do it differently.
So let's talk about where you are right now, Supply
Yeah.
Change Capital. So you and your partner have launched Supply Change Capital to back the intersection of food, culture, and climate, right?
Yeah.
These are all underrepresented in mainstream VC. So this is kind of a three-part question, I suppose. So tell us a
Okay.
little bit about about supply change and what you want people to understand about the market opportunity that you see, that you think others are still missing.
Yeah. Yeah. So after 5 years of running that first venture firm, we fully deployed the capital. The opportunity we saw in early stage hardware had sort of dissipated. And so I was ready to do something else, and happened to reconnect with a friend from business school. And as we were each getting to know more about what the other had been working on, we started to uncover this thesis, right? And so it happened very organically, very beautifully, actually. We were both at inflection points in our career, and we were looking for, the next thing that was going to carry us for the next 20 years of our careers, and found synergy and values and how we approach the world. But yeah, Supply Change Capital was started in 2020, late 2020, and we're an early stage venture capital firm that is really investing in the future of the food industry. We invest in technology all across the food supply chain. So if I had to describe this, I would say this is about the systems that people and the planet rely on every single day, right? From automation that improves labor and safety, to platforms that are predicting climate volatility, that are elevating supply chain risk. You can think of us as the people who back the critical food infrastructure that no one sees, but we all need. And we saw incredible opportunity to bring that, bring our lens and our experience, to merge it together and to build out this firm.
That's awesome. Like I said to you on one of our first calls, or on our first call, how come I hadn't heard of you guys? I feel like we really need to, spread the gospel of supply chain capital here, because it's just amazing, and definitely something that we need greater attention to, and greater focus of, and we don't see. There's not a terrible amount of players, or there's not a large number of players in this. And so, what do you feel, or what do you want people to kind of understand about this, and where do you see this growing and kind of going over the next few years?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's a great question. I mean, I think, what really drives us, and Shana Harris is my partner. She spent her 20-year career across the food system, from nonprofit to corporate to venture-backed startups. And what drives us is, we think about the major challenges that are impacting lots of different industries, but the food industry especially, right? We're thinking about our nutritional health crisis. And as someone who grew up under the poverty line, this one especially rings true to me, right? Now, when I have conversations with my parents about the work that I do, my mom will say things like, when you were a kid, I couldn't afford to think about nutrition. I couldn't afford to think about healthy food, right? I had to worry about keeping your belly full. because what I was most worried about was you telling me you were hungry. And so that's another little voice, right? My shoulders are full of little voices and little reminders. That sounds very kooky, but but that is one of the drivers. Another is around supply chains, right? We think about the challenge in moving goods from one place to another, and recently tariffs only add to that, but we already had this crazy requirement for efficiency in moving goods from A to B. And then lastly, on the workforce front, we think there's a huge opportunity to leverage technology and ensuring that farms have the labor they need. There's a stat that says 50% of farms have a labor shortage currently, and our workforce is in flux. We need to worry about retention. We need to worry about upskilling our workforce, and these kind of labor shortages put pressure on the cost and availability of food. So those are the challenges that Shanna and I think about every single day. And as we evaluate companies, we're focused on investing in companies that improve our health, that reduce the food system impact on the environment. And we also do it with a lens for diversifying the food ecosystem.
Mm-hmm. Do you think that there's enough attention, or not attention, but do you think that there's enough, like when you look at founders and you're evaluating, founders and their businesses, how do you feel that there are enough out there, or how can we? Because I feel like there's not, and
Really?
we need to. I mean, I'm not very familiar, but that's the perception that I have, is that there's not that many in this particular, in the space that you're looking. Am I
Oh, yeah.
completely wrong? Are there a lot of players? Are there a lot of people, a lot of folks out there that are trying to get their businesses off the ground that specifically address the issues that you
Yeah.
just mentioned?
Yeah, that's a great question. And certainly we've had folks ask that too. We think about this in two different ways, right? There are the companies that have a wedge in food, where if they solve the issue in the food, within the food system, it opens the door to other massive markets. And I'll give you an example, right? We recently invested in a company that does liquidity financing for ag exporters into the US. And so, they're looking at that market and they're saying, hey, the need for liquidity is pretty great. It can take up to 90 days for them to get paid back. And so if they can solve liquidity for import export in the ag market between two countries, we can easily see them expand, right? Right now they're working in Mexico. We can see them expand throughout Latin America. And then we can see them expand to other commodities, other sectors of import export. So that's the wedge in food company. And then there's the first, we call the first in food. These are companies that have a huge market opportunity within the food system and wouldn't necessarily move to other industries. And when you think about this includes food safety compliance, right? It includes health and nutrition at scale. So this is a market. This is a huge market. Food tech is over a $10 trillion market. And if you're thinking about supply chain, procurement, point of sale, right? We've had massive IPOs that address just one part of this food system. So that's how we think about it. There's either the company that has a massive market in food alone, or there's a company that can come solve something in food with a wedge, we call wedge in food, and then expand to other opportunities. But yes, we're targeting emerging venture capital outcomes, and certainly see a lot of deals in this space. I think we saw over 1,500 last year.
Okay. Well, I clearly am ignorant because like I said, I'm not,
Yeah.
versed
No,
in that
I
space. So
think,
I like this because I talk to so many, especially younger, early career professionals
mhm.
that, that I feel like this is like a really great episode because a lot of them will come to me seeking guidance in terms of like, what are my next steps, or like whatever I'm doing right now, I feel like there's more, or I can be doing like there's a greater purpose to
Mhm.
my work. And sometimes they have it clear. Like sometimes they'll tell me, but I think this is a really great platform, and just to be able to hear this, because I feel like if there was more exposure especially at earlier career levels, you would see greater, this would probably expand quite a bit, because it has a lot to do with the exposure. But I cut you off. Sorry.
No, no, no. That's I love that you're in a seat to be able to influence and broaden the horizon of opportunity for people, right? Because these niche, if you will, sectors they're hard to learn about.
Yeah. And I mean, as we think through the future, or to the future, I mean, these problems and these issues are only going to continue to persist, and likely worsen, until we have folks like you and the founders that you're backing, that are looking at innovative ways, and driving solutions to address these problems, right?
Mhm.
I mean,
Yeah.
um, okay, so I want to touch on something that again you had brought up in one of in our first conversation, and you had mentioned that there's this very odd pipeline between aerospace and food, and so I want to circle back to that because I'm curious, because you mentioned this, and so
Yeah.
why do you think so many engineers and space people end up solving food systems?
Yeah. Oh my gosh. I have this like working draft of a blog around the one-way road between aerospace and food. And when we were raising our first fund, this was certainly a big hot topic, right? Everyone wanted to know, how do you go from aerospace to food? And I remember specifically, we were on a call with one, now investor, and I noticed that their background was civil engineering, and now they were, an exec at a big CPG company. And I said, I know one question you're not going to ask me, and I know that you're not going to ask me about, mechanical engineering or aerospace to food, because I see that you've gone civil to food. And so that was a big conversation opener. And I think so. There are many people who have done this. There are founders. There are founders who have gone from aerospace to now working on solving something in the food industry. Um, you see it often in very complex, technical processes. Ag tech or ag robotics is another area where I've seen several founders move to. Engineering is really about problem solving, and some engineering disciplines, more than others, about taking a problem, breaking it down, and trying to find a solution. And so I think engineering broadly is a pretty amazing entry to entrepreneurship. But there are also companies that we've evaluated that are strictly in the intersection of space and food, right? Whether it's a company building a pod to grow, greens on the moon, or a company that is using satellite imagery to evaluate ag fields for, water resiliency or water content, or a company using satellite imagery for deforestation tracking. I mean, that intersection is particularly amazing. And when I get a company in front of us that's there, it just really warms my heart. But yeah, I think it's doing hard things and having that muscle memory to then solve the next one. And I think what happens for many of us is, we're on this hamster wheel of a career, and maybe we chose that career because of the financial gain, and we get to a certain point in our life where we want to do things differently, right? We want to carve a different path. We want to have more impact. We want to use our skills for good. There's one founder in our portfolio who used to work in the oil industry, in waste management in the oil industry, and said, I want to upcycle goods in a different industry. And so she started a company that's doing just that. So I think that's what happens. That's what happens to all of us aerospace people. We we get to a point in our life when we say we want to use these skills for something amazing and something that truly helps people. And not that aerospace is not amazing, because it also is, but I think some of us need more of a direct line of sight to human impact. And the food system is one of those, right? Think about how many people are struggling to feed their children and to do so nutritiously. How many people are in food deserts without access to food? And even for us as busy and smart women, right? I struggle to make the right choices for my family, and I would love more technology or more platforms that make healthy food accessible and easy. And I'd love to continue to have dinners around the table in whatever version that looks like when you're on the road. So there's a lot to do around food.
Yeah, that makes, the way you break it down. I was thinking, like, when I asked the question, and I was kind of thinking, like, what are my thoughts around that? And I thought, and you explained it nicely, but yes, engineering and kind of these STEM careers really arm you with the foundation to kind of think through problems, right? And to build out to end, you're essentially trying to find a solution, right? To these very complex issues. And so there's nothing that is one of the biggest, issues and problems that we see, challenges that we see moving forward, is how do we feed the population? How do we do this sustainably? Among a myriad of other questions that need to be addressed, right? But some of those things that you were mentioning are pretty badass. Those are pretty cool in terms of, just like a pod on the moon. And that's a great way to get kids interested in these careers. Talking about the potentials that they can, well, you could be an engineer and, this is what you're going to study. But once you have that foundation, you know what you're doing. This is the possibility,
Absolutely.
Well, awesome. Well, I just want to start to wind down a couple more minutes here. And I want to just touch on one thing that I talk about a lot with my candidates and on pretty much every episode. And that's this concept of non-traditional career paths and these non-traditional profiles, because you are clearly someone who did not follow the playbook at any point in your life. Is there any kind of linear, right? And so what do you wish other firms and funders and founders, everyone within that ecosystem, understood about the power of non-traditional paths and profiles?
I just posted something on Instagram yesterday about, there's a word in Spanish that doesn't translate very well to English, but it's incomodar. And, it's a woman talking about how throughout her life, she's been a pro at, kind of disturbing, but disturbing is so not the right word. It is like, I don't know, Alexis, help me.
Making uncomfortable. Making uncomfortable.
The
art
right?
of making discomfort, maybe.
Yes. But in Spanish, the word is so powerful. And she talks about how, when she told her mother that she didn't want to make tortillas, and then she got into a community where people told her she didn't belong, and she constantly heard, no, this isn't for you. You're not the right archetype. And so she talks about how she's just a pro at incomodar. And so I reposted it because it resonated so deeply with me. When we hire and, as we build out our team and as we look at entrepreneurs, we're focused on skill sets and mindsets, right? So what do you have experience doing? And then what's your mindset for how you approach a problem? Right? How do you convince yourself that you can? How do you convince yourself this is a big enough problem How are you thinking about building your team? And so we're way more focused on skill set and mindset than experience or the flow of their career. And I wish that more venture firms thought that way, and I think many do. Right? I do think the environment is changing. We certainly have investors with team members who have different career paths, but this is an industry in which you need people to be smart, to think quickly, to be resourceful, to be humble, and to pivot when needed, to ask for help when needed. And so that's what we hyper focus on and try to vet for. And when you think about, unique career trajectories and challenges, like who else would be super humble and quick and scrappy and, focused on building a solid team than someone who's been through something really, really hard.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Do you feel, in terms of like if we bring in this, I mean, this is this concept of diversity and diverse backgrounds, how much do you think what is the risk? Maybe that's the way I need to frame it. What is the risk that firms take by maybe taking a safer path with those profiles that come from pedigree, those profiles, or even those founders, those founders that come from, more of the traditional path?
Yeah. I think there's a very real risk and there's a perceived risk, right? The real risk is training and time and mentorship, which we found in our own experience to be heightened when you pick a candidate who doesn't have direct experience in what you're hiring for. So it means we need to be prepared to do more onboarding, to spend more time. This is a person who needs to build out their network versus coming in with one. And so it really requires a commitment to do things differently, a commitment to open doors, and a commitment to the long-term career path of this person, right? We know that if we put in the time now, the ROI will be positive. The perceived risk, I've heard some of my peers talk about how this is when fundraising, like the backgrounds of their employees would be taken into account. A founder looking at the team might say, this is not a top tier team. This is not, so that perceived risk around identity, I think is silly and less important, but certainly there is some time required to onboard and bring this person up to speed. And it requires a commitment to building out the firm in more of this long-term outlook way.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. My last episode was with Charles Hudson from Precursor Ventures. And one of the things that he said is just, I'm looking for, like these non-traditional, they don't have to have pedigree. They don't have to come from like an Ivy League school. They have to have bold ideas. They have to have these, and I just like the way that he said it, just these bold ideas and the desire to solve these problems and being really hyper focused on like solving the problems through whatever the product or the service that you're,
Love that.
and I
love
really
that.
like
And
that.
he's awesome.
Yes. Well, everyone is in good company here with my guests here. All right. So just to close things out, and this is more of a personal message and circling back to kind of the first part of the conversation. But if your 16-year-old self could see you now, what do you think 16-year-old Noramay would say?
Rock on, girl. She would say, F yeah. I get goosebumps thinking about 16-year-old me being, scared about life. I think that she would be excited about the breadth of shit we've done. And how we've really bet on ourselves.
Awesome. Well, we will end on that. So, Noramay, thank you so much for joining me on Take the Stage and the special series, Ladies Who Rock. This is your platform. Everything that you're doing, your story is incredibly inspiring. And like you said at the beginning, if someone, if you can do this and achieve so much in this relatively short amount of time, then that next person, that's 16 years old, 17, 25, wherever they are in life, can also do it. So thank you.
Thank you.
And that's a wrap. Thanks for listening to Take the Stage. If you enjoyed this episode, please share it with others, post about it on social media, or leave a rating and review. To hear past shows, please go to our website, career-rockstars.com. If you are a company or candidate who would like to work with Career Rockstars, reach out on LinkedIn or send an email to Alexis at career-rockstars.com. Thanks again, and until next time.